If you're a person, like I am, odds are you've eaten gluten at some point, and probably a lot of it. So why all of a sudden is there a trend for products and foods to be made without any gluten at all? It seems like a lot of people are actively avoiding it these days, even though traditionally gluten's been our friend for a really long time. Gluten comes from grains, like wheat, barley, and rye, which have been cultivated by human civilizations for about 10,000 years. Now, if we look at the anatomy of grain, a typical kernel has three basic parts. There's the outer shell, or bran, a small internal reproductive structure known as the germ, and the majority of the inside is called the endosperm, which contains carbohydrates and proteins that are used to nourish the plant's embryo. And it's also here where you find the building blocks of gluten. It's made of two protein components, gliadin and glutenin. And in the presence of water, they'll structurally change shape and bond together to produce an insoluble and elastic network of proteins that we call gluten. So gluten imparts not only the chewiness of the food that we eat, but also the spongy texture because it can trap air. Gluten protein networks can fill with swollen hydrated starch granules and gas bubbles, which allows dough to rise. Gluten is a great food stabilizing and binding agent. So besides the obvious food products of breads and pastries, you can also find gluten hidden in a wide variety of products, like alternative meat, soy sauce, cold cuts, soup broth, hot dogs, candy, beer, ketchup, and believe it or not, you can find it in vitamins and supplements, and even lipstick. Now, there's no evidence to suggest that eating a gluten-free diet is actually good for your overall health. So if you cut it out, it's also good to keep in mind that you might indirectly be cutting out other necessary dietary components like vitamins and minerals that are found in whole grains. It's also good to keep in mind that eating gluten-free food doesn't make that food any healthier, any lower in calories, or any more natural. And usually it's the opposite, since food producers have to supplement lots of salt, sugar, and fat into those foods to help bind them together and also to make them more enjoyable for you to eat. And not to mention that gluten-free food is usually a little bit more expensive. Now there is, however, about 1% of the population that has an inherited chronic digestive disorder known as celiac disease, which is actually triggered by ingesting gluten. Although it's often mistaken as a food allergy, it's actually an autoimmune reaction that occurs in the small intestines. This means that gluten proteins cause the immune system to begin attacking the internal tissue layer of the intestinal tract. And chronic inflammation of this tissue over time causes destruction and atrophy of the intestinal villi, leading to less absorption and major nutritional deficiencies. Now, besides those people that have celiac disease, there's also been a steadily increasing number of people within the population that show gluten sensitivity. Now, this means they test negative for disease, but they still display similar digestive symptoms when they ingest gluten. And this could happen to people that have been happily eating gluten their whole lives. So what's the reason behind this gluten sensitivity increase in the population? Well, it's not exactly clear, but it could be due to the fact that we're eating more gluten as part of our diet than we ever have before. It's not just a component of our diet anymore, it's in fact our whole diet, and we could be overwhelming the digestive capacity of our intestines. Now, it could also be due to the fact that the grains we use today are high-yield grains that are not processed in traditional methods. Now, this would allow plant enzymes to begin breaking down the proteins in the kernel before we ever ingested it, essentially digesting the protein for us before we ever ate it. Now, for those of you with gluten sensitivity, make sure you read all of your food labels very carefully because gluten can be hidden anywhere. But for those of you that are gluten tolerant, don't be lured into the fad of cutting it out of your diet for no reason. In fact, go out and buy a pastry. I guarantee you'll be happy that you did. And remember, science bonds us.